A secret affair, a love triangle, and a simmering rivalry, all leading to a deadly showdown. In front of her own children, a young mother's dream life was ripped away in seconds. This is the chilling true story of love, betrayal, and murder. Welcome to True Crime's Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories the guilty prayed would stay buried. It was early evening on July 14th, 2024, when the heavy summer air in Cedar Crest seemed to press down on everything, thick with heat and tension. The smell of fried chicken and collard greens drifted from open kitchen windows, mixing with the faint scent of cut grass and the sharper tang of car exhaust from the nearby street. The voices of children echoed between the brick apartment buildings, high and carefree, but under that hum of life was an edge, something almost electric. Monique Ellis stepped out from the dim hallway of her building into that charged air, her figure strong and graceful despite the weight of late pregnancy. She was 36, her skin a rich mahogany glow under the warm orange of the setting sun. Her dark hair, pulled into a loose twist at the nape of her neck, framed a face full of soft angles and watchful brown eyes. A sleeveless floral dress floated lightly around her knees, but the swell of her belly was impossible to miss. Amamari, her 2-year-old daughter, rested on her hip, chubby arms looped lazily around her mother's neck. The little girl's skin was smooth and golden, her curls tied up with a pink bow. She blinked sleepily at the world from beneath long lashes, unaware that this night would burn itself into her memory. Just behind them, Monique's 2 young sons, 7-year-old Zion and 5-year-old Caleb, trailed along, kicking at pebbles, trading jabs and laughter. Monique glanced back at them with a half smile, the kind she gave when she wanted to remind them she was listening even when she wasn't looking. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from surviving hard years without letting them break you. Everyone in Cedar Crest knew Monique was building something, a better life for her children. She'd come to Brookhaven from Jacksonville to chase her degree in business management, with dreams of opening a small boutique filled with clothing she designed herself. Even after dropping out once to care for her kids, she had re-enrolled, determined to finish. Friends said she had a way of making you feel seen and welcomed, her laughter warm and full, her presence almost magnetic. But she also had her share of battles, and the most dangerous of them wore the face of Kendra Voss. Kendra was just 21, tall and lean, with deep espresso skin that gleamed under the faint sheen of summer sweat. Her hair was a cascade of tight, glossy curls that framed a face both striking and sharp, eyes a stormy black that rarely softened. She was dressed in black leggings and a gray hoodie despite the heat, the hem swaying against the curve of her hips as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. Like Monique, she was pregnant, though not as far along, and like Monique, she had a child by Trayvon Banks. Trayvon was the thread that tied them together, and the knot had been pulling tighter for months. He was 30, with a solid build, smooth caramel skin, and the kind of easy charm that drew women in before they realized how many others he'd drawn the same way. The triangle between them had once been a quiet rivalry, whispers, looks, little stings, but social media had turned it into a public battlefield. Posts that pretended to be about just life, but were really aimed like arrows. Long threads of comments, baiting replies. They had fought before, but tonight the heat between them was visible, like ripples over hot pavement. Monique and Kendra stood facing each other in the center of the courtyard, their voices cutting through the evening air. Zion and Caleb had slowed to a stop a few feet away, their playful energy draining as they caught the steel in their mother's tone. Amari shifted in Monique's arms, whining softly, her tiny hands patting against her mother's shoulder. Neighbors peeked from windows, the glow of television screens flickering across their faces. Some leaned on railings, whispering to each other, watching the exchange like it was a scene they'd been expecting. Kendra's eyes didn't blink. Her lips moved fast, her voice low and edged with venom. Monique's head tilted slightly, her chin lifting just enough to show she wouldn't be pushed back. The space between them was just a few steps, but it felt like the edge of a cliff. Then Kendra's right hand slid into the pocket of her hoodie, fingers curling around cold metal. When it came out, the pistol was there, matte black, small enough to hide in her palm, But suddenly the largest thing in the courtyard. Gasps rose from doorways. Zion's hand shot out toward Caleb, pulling his little brother closer. Monique froze, her eyes locked on Kendra's. Amari whimpered, sensing the change, but Monique didn't dare move her gaze from the weapon. The noise of the world dulled for a moment. The distant rattle of a shopping cart from the street, the muffled bass from a neighbor's stereo, until the sharp, terrible crack of the shot split the air. Monique jerked backward, the force of the bullet hitting her side, folding her toward the ground. Amari's scream pierced the night, high and unbroken, as her mother collapsed. Zion and Caleb cried out and ran forward, their small hands reaching for her as her body crumpled to the warm concrete. A neighbor's voice shouted for someone to call 911. Another knelt beside Monique, pressing desperate hands against the blood blooming through her dress. Kendra stood motionless now, her arms slack at her side, the pistol hanging loosely between her fingers. Trayvon had been standing at the far end of the courtyard, shadowed near the stairwell, his face unreadable. He didn't move toward either woman. The rising wail of sirens began to fill the space, bouncing between the brick walls. Blue and red lights painted the courtyard seconds later, spilling over the faces of crying children and the pale, stricken looks of the neighbors. Brookhaven Fire and Rescue moved in quickly, lifting Monique onto a stretcher. Amari reached for her mother, her little body shaking, but an EMT gently pulled her back, passing her into the arms of a weeping neighbor. Officers surrounded Kendra, their voices calm but firm as they took the gun from her hand and guided her into cuffs.
If you're enjoying this video, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. Share and like this video. It's free and won't cost anything, but it helps and encourages us to grow and do more. Thank you for your kindness, and back to the video.
The warm air still smelled of summer, but now it carried the sharp metallic bite of blood. Monique was rushed into the back of the ambulance, the gurney rattling as the wheels locked into place. Inside, the paramedics worked with rapid precision, one adjusting the oxygen mask over her face, another pressing thick gauze to the wound in her side. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she tried to form words, but they came out as a weak gasp. One of the medics squeezed her hand, telling her to hold on, that they were just minutes from Brookhaven Regional Medical Center. The sound of Amari's cries still echoed faintly from outside, muffled by the closing doors. The ambulance pulled away from Cedar Crest, tires squealing slightly as it turned onto the main road. Monique's blood soaked through the bandages quicker than they could replace them. She had already lost so much, and with her pregnancy, the stakes were doubled. The medic by her side kept glancing at the fetal monitor strapped to her belly, his jaw tightening at each reading. Back at the scene, Brookhaven police officers began stringing yellow tape across the courtyard. The crowd of neighbors had grown, murmurs spreading through them like a current. Kendra stood still as two officers, both white, their uniforms crisp against the dim glow of streetlights, guided her toward the back of a squad car. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes flickered toward Trayvon. He hadn't left his spot by the stairwell. The look between them was brief, almost imperceptible, but charged with a history no one else in the courtyard could fully understand. Trayvon was quickly surrounded by detectives, one of them a black man in his late 40s with a notepad in hand. They asked him to walk through what he'd seen, their questions steady but pointed. Trayvon spoke in short sentences, avoiding the gazes of the neighbors who watched from a distance. Some whispered that he'd been the one who fueled the feud. Others shook their heads, saying it had been bound to happen with the way things had been going. Officer Jenkins, a tall woman with a sharp bob of blonde hair, bent down slightly to speak with Zion and Caleb. Her voice softened as she asked if they wanted to sit in her cruiser while things were being sorted out. Zion clutched his brother's hand tighter, shaking his head. LaToya Grant, Monique's older sister, had arrived minutes after the shooting. She was breathless, her curls damp from the sticky night air, her wide-set eyes searching the courtyard until they landed on her nephews. She ran to them, wrapping both boys in her arms before lifting her gaze to the taped-off space where her sister had fallen. Her mouth trembled, but she held the boys close, whispering that she was here now, that they were safe. At Brookhaven Regional, the trauma team was already in motion when Monique arrived. They moved her into the bright, sterile light of the emergency bay, their voices quick and clipped. A surgeon in green scrubs leaned over her, assessing the damage, while a nurse updated him on the baby's condition. The heart monitor beeped steadily for now, but everyone in the room knew how quickly that could change. Outside the ER doors, Latoya paced in tight circles, Amari balanced on her hip, the toddler still sobbing softly. Zion and Caleb sat together on a plastic bench, swinging their feet, silent and pale. The fluorescent light above them hummed faintly, a too normal sound for the weight of what they'd just seen. An hour passed before a doctor stepped into the hallway. He looked first at Latoya, his expression a careful mix of professionalism and sorrow. He explained that Monique was in critical condition, that they were doing everything they could to stop the internal bleeding, but it was too soon to know if she or the baby would survive. Latoya nodded stiffly, her mind already spinning between disbelief and a fear too large to put into words. Back at Cedar Crest, Kendra was booked at the Brookhaven City Jail before being transferred to the county facility. The charges were severe, capital murder in the presence of a child. Because Monique had been pregnant, prosecutors were already considering an additional capital count for the death of the unborn child, a charge that could carry the death penalty. That night, the story spread through social media, neighbors posting shaky cell phone footage of the moments before and after the gunshot. The images of Monique cradling Amari, Kendra's arm raised, and Trayvon watching from across the courtyard became the center of every conversation in Cedar Crest. The streets buzzed with the kind of talk that came when tragedy struck close to home, whispers that blurred facts and theories, outrage mixing with grief. What no one knew yet was how quickly the loss would ripple through Monique's family and how the wounds from that evening would never fully heal. By the next morning, the sun rose over Brookhaven with a pale, muted light, as if even the day itself carried the weight of what had happened. In the trauma ward of Brookhaven Regional Medical Center, the steady beep of machines was the only rhythm in Monique's room. Tubes ran from her arms, oxygen flowed through the mask over her face, and the rise and fall of her chest was shallow but constant. The baby's heartbeat still registered faintly on the monitor, but the readings grew more fragile with each passing hour. Latoya sat at her sister's bedside, her hand wrapped gently around Monique's, speaking softly as if her voice could anchor her to this world. Amari sat curled in a chair beside the bed, her small head resting against Latoya's thigh, her eyes heavy but alert every time a nurse came in. Zion and Caleb had been taken home by a close friend of the family, though neither had spoken much since the night before. News of the shooting had spread quickly through Brookhaven, landing on local morning broadcasts and flooding timelines. Footage of the crime scene, with its bright yellow tape fluttering in the humid air, replayed between headlines about a domestic dispute turned deadly. In Cedar Crest, the courtyard where it happened was eerily quiet. The chalk outlines were gone, washed away by an overnight rain, but the memory hung there, unshakable. Residents passed each other with tight nods, their conversations subdued. Everyone knew Monique, and almost everyone had seen her children grow up on those very sidewalks. At the county jail, Kendra Voss sat in a small, pale blue interview room, her wrists still marked from the cuffs. Raymond Carter, her defense attorney, a tall man with deep-set eyes and a calm, deliberate voice, sat across from her. He leaned forward, speaking low, telling her that the charge was capital murder and that the prosecutors were considering a second count for the unborn child. He explained the severity: no bond unless a judge ruled otherwise, the possibility of life without parole, or even the death penalty. Kendra sat back in her chair, eyes narrowing slightly, her expression unreadable. She mentioned self-defense, claiming Monique had threatened her before. But when Carter pressed for details, she hesitated, her gaze flicking to the corner of the room, as though weighing what to say next. Across town, Allison Green, the lead prosecutor, was reviewing the initial police reports in her office. Her reputation for precision and relentlessness in the courtroom was well known. She highlighted key witness statements, particularly the accounts that placed Monique holding Amari unarmed when the shot was fired. There was also Kendra's post-arrest statement, given after she was read her rights, where she admitted she saw Monique holding her child and nothing else in her hands. That detail, Green knew, could be devastating to any claim of self-defense. By late afternoon, Latoya stepped into the hospital hallway as the doctor emerged from Monique's room, his face heavy with what he had to say. The words came carefully. They had done everything possible, but Monique's body couldn't recover from the trauma and blood loss. The baby hadn't survived either. Latoya felt the floor tilt beneath her as she gripped the wall for balance. She nodded faintly, tears spilling over, but her voice was gone. Back in Cedar Crest, the neighbors who had been watching updates on their phones exchanged glances of sorrow when they learned the news. For many, Monique wasn't just another resident. She was the woman who brought extra plates to block parties, who braided her daughter's hair on the steps, who offered to watch your kids when you needed an extra hour at work. That night, candles began appearing near the spot where she'd fallen. By dusk, the courtyard was lit by dozens of flickering flames, some placed in empty mason jars, others in glass holders brought from living rooms. A framed picture of Monique smiling in a sun hat leaned against the wall, a cluster of fresh flowers at its base. The air smelled faintly of melted wax and lilies, the quiet broken only by the occasional sniffle or soft murmur. In a home just a few blocks away, Trayvon sat alone at his kitchen table, the glow from his phone lighting his face as he scrolled through messages. Some were angry, accusing him of fueling the rivalry. Others were quieter, asking if he was okay, if he'd seen it coming. He didn't answer any of them. The weight of 2 lives lost and the lives left broken pressed down in a silence thicker than the summer heat. 2 days later, the courthouse in downtown Brookhaven was already buzzing before sunrise. The front steps filled quickly with reporters holding cameras, neighbors from Cedar Crest, and members of Monique's extended family, all waiting for the first hearing in the case against Kendra Voss. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with polish from the wood-paneled walls. Court officers moved with quiet efficiency, their shoes clicking on the marble floor. When Kendra was led into the courtroom, dressed in a beige jail-issued uniform, the low hum of conversation stopped. Her wrists and ankles were shackled, but her posture remained straight, her expression carefully composed. She avoided looking toward the gallery where Latoya sat with other relatives, their faces tight with grief. Judge Stephen Caldwell, a tall, silver-haired man in a dark robe, entered and took his seat at the bench. His voice was steady as he called the case, outlining the charges: capital murder in the presence of a child and a second count for the death of Monique's unborn baby. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Raymond Carter rose from the defense table, buttoning his jacket as he addressed the court. He argued for bond, citing Kendra's advanced pregnancy and health complications, including high blood pressure and signs of preeclampsia. He described her as a young woman with no prior convictions, who would comply with any conditions set by the court. As he spoke, Kendra kept her gaze forward, hands folded neatly on the table. Allison Green stood to respond, her tone precise and firm. She reminded the court of the evidence, witness accounts, the video footage, and Kendra's own admission that she saw Monique holding her toddler with nothing in her hands before firing. She emphasized the presence of 3 young children who had been only feet away from the shooting and the community's concern over the violence. When Carter mentioned self-defense, Green countered with the post-Miranda statement, noting it would be difficult to reconcile with the facts. Judge Caldwell listened without interrupting, his eyes scanning the case file in front of him. When he finally spoke, his decision was clear: bond denied. He cited the seriousness of the charges and the risk to public safety, adding that the jail's medical staff had reported Kendra's condition as stable and that she was receiving appropriate care. The clink of the gavel seemed to echo longer than usual in the hushed room. Latoya exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just slightly, though her eyes stayed fixed on Kendra as deputies escorted her out. Outside the courthouse, the humid midday air was thick with chatter as reporters tried to get comments from both sides. Carter moved quickly past the cameras, his jaw set, while Green paused only briefly to confirm the charges before disappearing into the shade of the courthouse entrance. That evening, Latoya returned to Cedar Crest for the first time since the night of the shooting. The courtyard was quieter than she remembered, the scent of grilled meat and summer spices drifting faintly from open windows. The memorial for Monique had grown. More candles, more flowers, handwritten notes tucked between photographs. She knelt to straighten a small stuffed bear someone had placed at the front, its fur already damp from the heavy night air. Behind her, A neighbor approached slowly, holding a foil-covered plate. She said she'd been making extra food for the children, that people in the building had been talking about helping out however they could. Latoya managed a faint thank you, her voice catching before she could say more. Across town, Kendra sat alone in her narrow cell on the jail's medical floor. The small window near the ceiling offered only a square of fading light. Dinner sat untouched on the tray beside her bunk. She leaned back against the wall, her hands resting on her stomach, her mind replaying the courtyard over and over. Monique's face, the sound of Amari crying, the way the air had gone still in the seconds before the gun went off. In the silence, the weight of what had happened pressed in from all sides. 3 days later, Monique's family gathered at a small Baptist church on the south side of Brookhaven for her funeral. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the threat of rain. Mourners filled the sanctuary, the soft rustle of fabric and quiet sniffles blending with the faint hum of the air conditioning. At the front, Monique's coffin rested beneath a spray of white lilies, her framed photograph beside it showing her smiling in a wide-brimmed sun hat, eyes bright, skin glowing under the summer sun. Latoya stood with Zion, Caleb, and Amari at the first pew. The boys wore matching black shirts and pressed slacks, their faces solemn in a way that seemed too old for their years. Amari clung to Latoya's skirt, peeking out at the unfamiliar faces. Friends and relatives rose one by one to speak about Monique's warmth, her laughter, the way she always found a way to help even when she had little herself. A childhood friend recounted afternoons spent sketching dress designs on the stoop, a dream Monique had never stopped talking about. Another neighbor remembered how Monique would stay outside until all the kids in the courtyard had gone in for the night, making sure everyone got home safe. When it was Latoya's turn, her voice trembled but didn't break. She spoke about her sister's determination, how she had rebuilt her life more than once, and how everything she did was for her children. She glanced toward the small cluster of classmates and professors from Brookhaven Community College who had come to pay respects, then back at the photo of Monique. She should have had more time, Latoya said softly. The service ended with a slow gospel hymn, the voices of the congregation rising and falling like a wave. Outside, the rain began to fall lightly, tapping against umbrellas as people followed the hearse to the cemetery. At the graveside, the air was cool and damp, the scent of wet earth mixing with the perfume of the flowers piled high. The pastor offered a final prayer before the casket was lowered. Latoya knelt beside the boys, her arms wrapping around them as they stared at the descending coffin. Amari whimpered, resting her head against her aunt's shoulder. Later that evening, a bittersweet gathering unfolded in Latoya's apartment for Amari's second birthday, a celebration Monique had been planning before her death. The living room was decorated with pink and white balloons, a small cake on the table, and a few wrapped gifts from family friends. Amari sat in a booster seat, a paper crown slightly askew on her curls, her small hands pressing into the frosting as the room softly sang to her. The moment was tender, but carried the weight of absence. Every laugh seemed to carry an echo of the one who wasn't there. Across town in the county jail, Kendra lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She could hear the faint murmur of another inmate's radio, the sound of rain tapping against the narrow window. Her hands rested on her stomach, feeling the faint kick of the baby she carried. She thought of the courtroom, of Trevon's face in the crowd, of Monique's last moments. In the stillness, there was no argument to make, no way to rewrite the scene, only the memory looping endlessly. The weeks that followed moved slowly, each day marked by small routines that felt heavier than they had before. Latoya found herself splitting her time between caring for the children, attending meetings with victim advocates, and answering the endless questions from investigators. Zion had started waking in the night from nightmares, and Caleb rarely let go of her hand in public. Amari, too young to understand everything, would often call out for her mother at bedtime, her voice soft and questioning. The community around Cedar Crest did what they could, delivering meals, offering rides, stopping by just to check in. But the absence of Monique was a wound no one could close. At the county courthouse, preparations for trial continued. Allison Green's office collected witness statements, reviewed the footage from that evening, and built the case with meticulous care. The defense focused on Kendra's health and pregnancy, signaling they would push the self-defense narrative despite the challenges it faced. The legal process would be long, and every appearance in court promised to reopen the pain for everyone involved. Trayvon stayed out of public view, his name still circling in conversations and social media threads. Some believed he bore as much responsibility for the tragedy as anyone. Others said he had simply been caught in the crossfire of choices he couldn't control. He didn't speak publicly, and each unanswered question only seemed to deepen the unease surrounding him. As summer slipped toward autumn, the memorial in the courtyard slowly thinned. The candles were gone. The flowers were replaced by the turning leaves drifting across the pavement. But for those closest to Monique, her presence lingered, in the echoes of her laughter, in the faces of her children, in the memory of her dreams that had been cut short. Latoya promised herself she would raise the children with those dreams in mind, that they would know who their mother had been and what she had fought for. The trial ahead would determine Kendra's fate, but nothing could undo what had happened on that hot July evening. This was a story of love turned sour, of jealousy and betrayal spiraling into violence, and of a family left to pick up the pieces in its aftermath. We want to know your thoughts on this heartbreaking case. Do you believe justice will be served? Share your opinions in the comments, tell us where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this one.